we just spent an hour with Andy Earl, right? And all I heard was my stomach rumbling all the way through it. That was basically it. That was my takeaway. It was like, eat more food before you do one of these.
Yeah, that was a lot. My face hurts from smiling. He actually had so many funny stories as well.
He is such, and you can see exactly how this guy just puts people at ease. There's no airs or graces. The guy's photographed more people than he can shake a stick at.
Honestly.
Everyone.
And he's so humble and so energetic and passionate about photography as a medium, and I just think that exudes off of him.
It does.
Like, I feel excited to go take photos right now.
I want to go and look at a Rothko painting, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's just that's bonkers. And you know, when I sit around thinking, what should I do? I'm looking for inspiration. You realise that the people who are really good at this stuff, they work really hard at it. He works really hard at getting inspired, informing his vision, you know. Works really hard on the shoot, thinking about the shoot. It's still now, you know, when he couldn't be more established. He knows he has to be nervous the night before a shoot.
Yeah.
Who does he get nervous photographing?
But I think that's so great. I think that's what creativity is. It's that nervous energy, and it's fueling it into the right direction to make something great, which he has.
Yeah. And now he gets to use loads of his pictures as well, which is awesome. Brilliant.
Yeah, an absolute great conversation, and I can't wait for everybody else to hear it.
Me too. Thanks, Rosie.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, and we're here today with Andy Earl. If you'd like to give us a hello.
Hi, thank you very much. Well, thanks for coming down. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thanks for coming to talk to us. We're really excited to have a conversation with you. We've got Jonathan here as well. And
yes,
I am Rosie.
Lovely. Thank you, Rosie.
Okay, so let's just get straight into it. I think it would be really great to hear about, you know, how your career began. I know that you studied at Trent.
Yep.
And also, did you do a year abroad in Baltimore as well?
I did. I was really fortunate. I mean, I started off, when I came to Trent, initially I wanted to be a racing driver. That's what I ever wanted to do.
Yeah.
And when I worked for a racing driver for a year, and then when it came to the end of the season, they didn't need me, so I came to art college instead, because the only other thing I liked doing was taking pictures. And then when I got to Trent, I thought it was going to be like more of a commercial photography course, but it was full of basically a couple of very crazy tutors, one called Thomas Joshua Cooper, who's an American, and another one called Paul Hill. And this was at the time when photography was being seen as a slightly more of an art form. It was very much the black and white image era, where it spent ages in the darkroom, and it was mad. I mean, I remember arriving there and being given a reading list of Carlos Castellander's Journey to Ixtland, Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and I thought, what the heck is this? I've come to do photography. But it was about trying to get into your head and trying to get ideas out and finding your vision. That's what they were on about.
Yeah.
And I had the first year, I was at Trent, and then I was fortunate enough to go to Baltimore to the Maryland Institute, which was just the best experience ever, to go age 20 or something, to go over and spend a year in America.
Yeah.
But it was, the course wasn't as good, but the cultural excitement and the difference of living in Baltimore. We were in the downtown area above the Greyhound bus station, and it was sirens every night and things. It was very different to Nottingham, but it was very exciting. And then that's where I came across colour photography. And at Trent, it was very much about black and white. You know, black and white's what you do. Colour photography seen as a little bit sort of commercial, you know, that sort of thing. So it was kind of they were uncertain about it. And anyway, I ended up shooting in Nottingham, and I started with colour, but because Nottingham was always slightly grey, I ended up putting a flash gun on the camera, basically to try and enhance the colours, because otherwise they just looked dull. And when I was doing it, when I was doing some shots, I came back and all the pictures were blurry, and I thought, oh, what have I done? And what it was I'd set the shutter speed wrong. So instead of setting it at 125th, it was at like 30th of a second. So the flash went off, stilled the motion of the person, and then the exposure got round and got a bit blurry. And I thought, oh, this is quite cool, you know. And it was very much an accident. And now, throughout my career, that's been the biggest thing, is that when accidents happen, you move on to the next stage.
Yeah.
And so so I started shooting, and as I say, it was I did a whole load in Nottingham, but it was always a bit grey, and I decided I wanted something colourful. Went down to Ascot races, and with this camera, and it all got a bit more complicated than that, but I started off with a camera with one flash, and then I had 3 flashes on it. Then I was shooting with a plate camera because I wanted really good quality and all this sort of stuff. So I had an MPP with 3 flashes off it, walking down Ascot High Street in top hat and tail, so I'd look as though I fitted in. And just taking pictures, and just completely and utterly in the zone of looking for pictures, and this was in a sort of May, June time, and then the final show was in, I think, late June, July. So my whole show was shot in the last month before I graduated.
Oh, wow.
Which was a bit of a daunting thing. and I did them all, and I had these pictures, and I came back and I was quite excited, and a lot of the students were quite interested in it.
Yeah.
And the tutors went, it'd been better in black and white, you know. And I thought, no, this is all about colour.
Yeah.
And that's what kicked me off, really.
Yeah.
And then I was fortunate enough that my external assessor was a lady called Sue Davis, who was the director of the Photographers Gallery down in London. Again, they would do, all sort of art photography, as you know, shows. And she was organising a thing called European Colour Photography. And she said, would you like to put a couple of photographs in the exhibition? And I went, yeah, great. Can I come to the opening, sort of thing? And I did. So I put... I also did some pictures of chickens, and they were all blurry as well, because when Ascot finished, I didn't know what to do. So that's another story as well. Actually, the chicken picture you should put in as well, because that was basically, I was taking a picture. It was at Chatsworth House, and there was a woman lying on the grass, and there were some chickens in the foreground. I thought, there's my colour, try and work it. And I had all my leads and everything. And as I went to take the picture, I tripped over the lead. The shutter went off, and I got a picture of a chicken's arse. Took it back to college, and they said, this is art, you're back on course, because it was blurry daisies, chicken's bum, and you couldn't see the girl behind. So again, another accident. So then I chased chickens for around things to do. And so it was a combination of those that ended up in the show. And when I had the opening, these 2 people came up, and it was Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood, who were looking for somebody to do an album cover, and or just looking for ideas for photography. And they wanted to recreate Manet's painting Le Déjeuner Célèbre, which was sort of controversial in its time. And Malcolm McLaren, Sex Pistols, and Vivienne were both, fantastic people, but they were completely, on a different planet, really. So this was my first real job, and it was so weird, and we went off and recreated it, and had to try and find a place where I had an old motorbike, and I was driving up and down riverbanks looking for somewhere that didn't have a housing estate behind it, so it looked a bit like the painting. And then we did it down near where I live in Surrey, and I did live in Surrey, and we ended up photographing it there, and it came out, and the record company loved it, and everybody, but because it was a band called Bow Wow Wow and things, and the record company weren't sure about it, and I think there was some hesitations, and Malcolm wanted exactly that controversy, and so it ended up coming out in Stern magazine, Face magazine, this sort of thing, and eventually they said, okay, we'll do it, because initially I hadn't been paid for it, because they said, if we can't use it, we're not going to pay you. And I said, this is my first job. And I thought, oh no.
Yeah.
And then McLaren turned round to RCA Records, and when they said, yes, we'd like to do it, they said, well, you're going to have to pay Andy £2,000. And this was, in the early 80s. It was a lot of money now. It was massive then. And he got it and gave it to me, and I bought my first cameras, my lights, and that started me off.
Wow, that is an incredible story.
So it was fun. So it was all within a sort of period of, a year or 2.
Yeah, it all took off quite quickly. If we could just go back to you studying in Baltimore, you were saying how, the course necessarily wasn't as structured, but just the cultural experience of being there influenced you. When you were over there, did you notice a big difference in the creative process of the other students? Like, were you with American students over there as well? Very much so. Yeah, it was American students, and they were a really interesting bunch of people. Most of them were from sort of Maryland, that sort of area, that come to the. It was called the Baltimore Maryland Institute. It was called, and
the tutors and things, they were very much into doing books. They liked doing books, so it was stories, and like Sally Mann and people like that. They were there, and they had sort of other photographers coming in that were more sort of art photographers. So it was much more playing on an idea and developing that idea through. The quality of the teaching wasn't as good, but the experience of being there was unbelievable, because everybody went, I love your accent and all that stuff. And the other thing was there was two of us that went out there. The girl called Deborah Baker, who's a brilliant photographer as well. She was much better than I was, and she and I were there. We went together, but we were on the course together, and she found it culturally really quite difficult, I think, being a woman over there. I mean, it was a fairly aggressive, because we were doing shoots on the streets and walking around and stuff, so I think she found that a bit uncomfortable. But to me, that's what was, everything looked so new, everything looked so different. The buildings were enormous, all the signs, the Americana everywhere, and I just thought, I know the way people were, and the whole culture was such a buzz, really. It was fantastic. So I think if anything like that comes as an opportunity to anybody, I would definitely do it. I think the more you throw yourself into these things, the more the experiences are
definitely
great.
How did you find returning back in your final year back to Nottingham, as you said, grey and rainy, having just had this amazing eye-opening experience? Was it a hard transition back?
I think I started doing. I saw the William Eggleston show in the Museum of Modern Art, and there was also Ralph Gibson, who was a black and white photographer whose work I really like, and I went to some talks of his and this sort of thing when I was there, and so I'd had that sort of understanding of how that was working, and I think the tutors were really interested because they were interested in all these photographers as well, so that kind of worked quite well. But because I came back and wanted to do colour, I felt as though I was sort of out of kilter, really. And so for the first, I mean, the winter term is always sort of doing your dissertation and all that stuff. So I did all that, and then when I was getting going, I was finding it, I was a bit sort of on my own because people weren't sure what I was doing. They did have a colour printer and everything there. I think it was still the same one when I saw it the other day. But it's still that same sort of thing was going on. But what I loved about being at Trent was the intensity of it. And I mean, this chap Tom Cooper would do his prints in the dark rooms. We'd all go in there and be able to help. You'd be there at 2:00 in the morning holding a Dodger thing because he was doing this landscape and wanted it all to come into certain ways. So all that nonsense was fantastic because it was this whole kind of submerge yourself in what you're doing and just find what gives you a buzz and go for it. And there was so much encouragement, even though, as I said, they preferred it to be in black and white.
Yeah. Do you think that resistance, you were slightly on your own, sort of showing a different way? Do you think the resistance of your tutor saying, it might have looked better in black and white, did that almost spur you on to be like, actually, I think that I'm going to prove that it does look better in colour?
I think, because I'd been, there was like Stephen Shaw, William Eggleston, there was that whole sort of American photographic culture coming through, which was all to do with colour and it was looking at it in a way of, like, say, Mondrian painting or something. So it was very much about balances of colour rather than balances of black and white. And I'm not saying that I work in that way, but it was very much that kind of inquisitiveness that I found so interesting. And I mean, I think they were interested because there was nobody else really doing colour at Trent at the time. But it was, I think it went down well in the end. But at the time, it was sort of, I was struggling a bit in the spring term to try and get it to come together.
So you really had to back yourself.
You did. I mean, there was lots of encouragement, but it was like as all of us knows, being photographers, it's finding that idea and then realising it. And sometimes you start doing something and it's working and then it falls apart and you've got to go back and sort of pick yourself up and look at it from a slightly different angle and just keep going and going. And then with me, as I say, it was when I set the exposure wrong and I got this blurry effect. I thought, that looks rather fun, and everyone, well, it's out of focus, but it was that sort of G'd me on. So I suddenly thought, wow, I hadn't seen this before. There was a guy called Mark Cohen, a photographer, who had done some black and white pictures with a flash using a flash outside and with a big balloon and in front of a girl's face or something in the streets in, I don't know, somewhere in Newcastle or something like that. And I looked at that and I thought, that just looks great. It looks so cool. And it was that sort of then searching for that quirkiness of things that, as I say, like this Ralph Gibson photographer, he was black and white, very sort of abstract shapes and things. But I just loved the sort of... it was like a sort of a Malevich painting. Do you know what I mean? There was just this whole sort of concept going on behind it, which I now have learnt more about. But I mean, at the time, I was intrigued by these things and wanted to find out more. And I think that was always very much encouraged, was the research. And when I was at Trent, I mean, the history of photography, it was sort of drummed into us a bit. But actually, it's quite good because you suddenly look back and think, oh yeah, so-and-so did that back in the 30s.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of stuff.
It does click it. You're like, okay, it did inform all of this, but it, you know, it takes getting to a certain stage to realise the relevance of it, I think.
Yeah, it's putting it sort of into context. And at the time, you just think, oh no, not another lecture. But, but at the same time, that's what really, really drew me through. I think it was great.
And with your creative process, I'm interested, I'm sure this has evolved over time, but when you've got a project you're working on, do you like see that image in your head before you're taking it, or is it something that comes together in the moment?
No, but I mean, like I was doing a shoot yesterday, as I just said, and we agreed to do it last week, and we were going to try and do it quickly in order to sort of keep the energy going, which meant trying to come up with various ideas. So I come up with ideas of what I want to do and how I want to light it, roughly, things like that. Half that goes out the window when you started, but at least your head's in that space and you're completely focused on how you want to do it, what you're trying to achieve, how you're trying to get those things to go. And I always find that if you go in there with quite a strong idea, I think, well, I might try this lighting, might try that. And then sometimes it just doesn't work or something happens, or half the time you're doing something and one light goes off and you think, oh, that looks good. So it's being opportunistic in that sort of thing, but it's just sort of... you go in there with your antennae up and you're just looking for everything. I mean, personally, I prefer shooting outside than in a studio because I find it more inspiring and more exciting and stuff like that. Sometimes I go into a studio and think, oh, God, where do I start? So I have to sort of try and you build yourself props up to and things like that to make it. And then half the things we don't necessarily use, but at least you've gone through your thought process of what you want to do and you've got an idea. I mean, rather than somebody coming in and say, oh, just stand there and we'll do some pictures. So I was doing a portrait of you. I wouldn't do that, I don't think, unless there's something that I saw when you walked in. I'd think, oh, great, I like certain things that I can want to try and do. This is how I maybe would try and light you. And then I might try and do it and think, well, that's not suiting what you're about. So that's, you just keep moving the whole time. You're forever inquisitive as to what you can do with something. And I think, for me, that's what I've loved about photography. And it's just, that opportunity has been amazing.
Definitely. It's really exciting to hear about, your process and how it seems like quite like an immersive journey as well. And I think that's the interesting thing about photography is you can get so absorbed in it. And I've found with the degree as well, that doing it, you find out a lot about yourself, whereas other degrees, you're learning stuff, whereas here you're learning about yourself whilst doing your degree, and I think that's such like a special opportunity.
It is, and I think that's what, but that's it. You're in that stage of your life where you're finding something that really excites you. And I remember again going back to that with Ralph Gibson. He'd look at pictures and he was looking at mine. And he said, yeah, these are good. He said, but they're not like you. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you're trying to do other people's pictures, and in a way, you end up having a bit of Ralph Gibson, a bit of William Eggleston, a bit of this and a bit of that, and you put it in the mix and out comes your pictures, know. And I think that was very much, that really made me think about things, made it quite sort of exciting. I mean, he turned around and he said, photograph the way you move. And I said, what do you mean photograph the way you move? He said, you're quite energetic and you're doing these rather studied pictures. And so then when the flash went off and it all went blurry, I thought, oh, hello, this looks fun. Yeah. So that's how I think it kicked off.
Yeah, that's amazing. Another question I'd like to ask you is there anyone in your life that you go to get the truth? So say you've done some work and you think, hey, I really want the honest opinion of this.
Yeah.
Do you have anyone?
Sophie, my wife. Definitely. I mean, we've been together for 40 odd years now, and she's great because she'll look at it and say, that's rubbish.
Yeah.
And there's also other people. I mean, there's lots of people who I respect their point of view. There's when I left Trent, I worked for an artist called Brian Clark who lived up in the Peak District, and I mean he was an artist, and he did paintings with stained glass windows and stuff, very, very abstract, very funky. He was a punk, and I went to have an interview with him up there, and I drove up on my motorbike and had the interview on a bouncy castle in the garden. I thought, this is weird, but that was how he thought and how he does things. And so he's always a go-to. He's a good. He'll look through my pictures and yeah. I mean, I really, really respect his point of view, and I really respect his eye. He also knows Ralph Gibbs. He's fascinated with photography, you know. He has a big sort of understanding of it all. But at the same time, when I did a book, he wrote an introduction, and it was quite a nice sort of thing, saying, you know, that I've got 1 foot in commercial and 1 foot in art, but basically I'm a commercial photographer. I'm not an art photographer. You know, I'd love to be an art photographer, but then, to be honest, I'm much more comfortable probably, you know, straddling the two.
Yeah. And I think that seems to be the balance a lot of photographers have to strike, especially when they're starting up, is trying to do the commercial and art alongside, pairing that together.
Yeah.
Because I think in some aspects there's a bit of stigma around doing commercial work. People can almost be a little bit like they'll hide it in their portfolio. But like, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think where I've been fortunate is that basically doing record covers, it's about coming up with an idea, working with the artists or with the management or with the record company and all this sort of thing. What do you want to do? Coming up with an idea. They've maybe seen something in your portfolio they like the feel of. And so that's what's your introduction in a way. So once that's happened, I think that's good. But what I've loved is, for me, it's always been still image. I've done videos. I did a video for the Rolling Stones and all sorts of things, which I've enjoyed enormously, and it was good fun. But to me, it's that image. It's that one shot that stands up. And if that picture then, and when I take a picture, I think, yeah, that's good. But it's not till 6 months later you say, okay, maybe that one is good. You know, you sort of think that one now works. And it's that playing with it all, what I've been doing. And I mean, the good thing for me, that I've done a lot of portraiture as well, but mainly it's the music, record covers, which has been working with some very exciting, you know, Storm Thorgerson, who did all the Pink Floyd stuff. He and I worked together, and there was a guy called Mark Farrow who do all the Pet Shop Boys, and I love his style of work as well. And there's lots of people that I get a real buzz up. And then working with somebody like Prince, for heaven's sake, you know, I mean, they are, you know, he was completely mad, which was just lovely, you know, because there's something to really work with. So that sort of thing's been very stimulating. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, unfortunately, Brian Griffin, a photographer, black and white photographer, who I had a lot of respect for and knew reasonably well, and he was, you know, he did some amazing pictures in the 80s and 90s, or mainly 80s, and then he just went across to film, and never really, I don't think, made such a success of it. And it would then be the commerciality came in. You know, he could probably make more money doing it. That's never really bothered me. I mean, my motivations, you know, fortunately, sometimes I get paid quite well, but that's completely secondary. It's about doing the pictures.
Yeah.
And I think that was just a shame with Brian, because I think if he'd stayed with it, he was one of the most seminal photographers of the 80s and 90s sort of thing.
Yeah. So I'm getting the picture that it's very much about the picture for you.
Yeah.
Do you do much like post-production with your imagery, or are you very like you shoot it and that's how you want the final outcome?
I think because I grew up without Photoshop, and so my era was film as well. So again, you had to be, and we were shooting on transparency, you had to be quite accurate with your exposure. It was in like a third or half of a stop, otherwise it didn't work really well. So the accuracy of that was really good. And when digital came along, I sort of thought, I've got to just join in, you know, and get involved with it. But I wasn't completely literate at all, and all that stuff. So I was getting assistants who were sort of raised on Nintendo to help me to do how to get the pictures onto the screen and all that sort of thing, and how to get it working. And I really enjoyed the whole palette you've got with digital, you know, and you've got with Photoshop and all that side of things. But at the end of the day, for me, the pictures always in the picture. So it is about the lighting, it is about the balance of how everything comes together, how much you do. In fact, I think I was mentioning to Jonathan, there was when we were here last time, there was a musician who, where I work, there are musicians here, and he's a producer who does amazing, concerts and does recordings of stuff and things like that. And we were he was doing a drum, recording a drum thing, and he was moving the microphone slightly this way, slightly that way, doing like that. I said, that's what we do with lights. We just adjust it to get the feel, what we want and how we want to do it. And I thought, so, we are all together. The creative process is all together, because it's all about sort of just trying to push the edge the whole time.
Yeah, that's great. Do we want to start going into some specifics?
Yes, we want to pod chat hard now.
Okay, go.
Yeah, harder. No, we want to talk about some actual pictures. There's so much you said there that I just kept my mouth shut because it was so lovely to hear. But you should be reassured that Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance has crossed my desk a number of times.
Has it?
Yes,
Has it?
I have passed it to students, and that's a coincidence. I didn't know that you
No.
got pushed that as well.
Well, the only reason I got it because I was riding a motorbike, and I went through it, and there was nothing about how to fix my carburation at all.
But no, it was great. I mean, just your love of photography is great. And your love of I'm going to say love of not being afraid to fail. But you're sort of talking about things that go wrong, and you just think, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
that's a great way to look at when things go wrong. That's brilliant. So I want to talk about when things go wrong.
Yeah,
because I've got loads of those stories, and you must have some. It can't just be me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of like talking about how you prep for a shoot and things like that. And it's the same doing whatever you're going to do. I'll always carry a spare camera, and I'll always now we have to have not necessarily a spare computer, but another way of accessing all this stuff if it all crashes and things. But I remember doing a shoot with this is sounding a bit like one of those catch the name, but it was Paul McCartney, and he wanted to do a big shoot for the centre of his album. It was Tug of War, and he was at Elstree Studios doing a rehearsal, and I was doing a lot of panoramic shots at the time because I loved the panoramic camera, because it was a 6x17 Linhof, so your actual neg was that wide, and so quality wise it was beautiful, but it was like normal vision but super wide, like Vista Vision, it wasn't sort of distorted. And I was doing, and he wanted to do a picture of the band playing for the centerfold, and we were up there, and I got all sudden I was standing up, and he went, "What do you want to hear?" Like, oh, Jesus, Paul McCartney's asking what do you want to hear. But he was very accessible. He started playing, and I went in and shot number 4, camera jammed. I thought, oh, and it was my Linhof, and I didn't have a spare Linhof because they're quite rare. But I had another camera, and I had to keep changing it. And basically, it just jammed. The shutter just jammed, and so I had an assistant there, and so he was sort of. I just said, "Oh, just take it now." And I put my other camera up and started shooting with it, and thinking, "Well, I can just crop it," which we ended up doing, unfortunately. But that was a time when you just die, because you think, I haven't got, the camera's not working, and you have to sort of. I hope he doesn't see this, Paul McCartney, because he'll say, "Oh, that's why it was a bit grainy." And Linda McCartney was there as a photographer as well, so it was Wings or whatever it was. Yeah.
That is awkward. No, I didn't mean to bring us all down.
No,
it was. We'll come back to where things go wrong later.
Yeah.
But no, I have to ask you about Pink Floyd. I mean, let's talk about some actual pictures.
Okay. Yeah.
So I grew up with that album cover.
Right.
What happened? Well, why? I mean, that's working with Storm.
Storm Thorgerson. Yeah. So basically, I mean that whole surrealistic thing was something I was always interested in from coming out of Trent, and the pictures that I always got a buzz out of was that sort of slight surrealism thing, whether it was Magritte, whether it was whoever it was, and then with Storm, he did. Hypnosis was the name of his company. They did lots of very fantastic album covers, the classic ones that were the sort of surreal ones in the 60s, 70s, 80s and this sort of stuff. And anyway, we kind of got on quite well, and he liked the way that I took pictures, and I've said, I'd love to do something with you. And I think there was a guy called Keith Breeden, who was a designer I was working with, who was doing a project with Storm, and I went out and photographed a band called Ellis, Beggs and Howard, and we shot them somewhere out in Spain, and he'd made all these sort of big masks and things, but they were out of boilers, copper boilers, out of a thing, and they made them into sort of sculptures, and we had them up on the top of these weird hillsides. It was great. It was absolute nonsense, complete great. And then Storm said, "Oh, I'm doing this Pink Floyd thing." To me, that was like, that was the big one. That was like getting the Apple campaign or something like that. And so we went out to Spain because it was October, so we wanted the light and wanted to do the things. The album was called Delicate Sound of Thunder, and I said to Storm, I said, "Well, what's the idea?" He said, "Oh, darling," he said, "delicate sound is birds, thunder and lightning light bulbs. It's so interesting." And then it turned out it was also Salvador Dali's coat, which had all the glasses on it, and he'd used that and said, "We'll put the..." So he was using all these little tidbits of information and putting it together. So it's like I was saying, you end up just collecting little bits and things. Collecting little bits of things and then putting it together. And so we shot the thing, I think, about 7 or 8 times. He wanted it midday sun, absolutely, stark, no shadows. I was sort of thinking, "Oh, the light's really nice this evening. Why don't we do something?" So we tried doing one like that. He didn't want it. So he just wanted literally middle of the day. And what we've got is the as I say, the funniest thing was arriving in Spain. It was the time you had to go through customs, and we had all these boxes of light bulbs, and they were opening up the light bulbs. They said, no, in Spain we have the screw fix. These ones are no good. Trying to explain it's for a Pink Floyd poster. And then behind the rocks was a company called Animal Actors, and they had all the birds. So I'd be going 1, 2, 3, and they'd be throwing them in the air, and we had to catch them. So again, this isn't Photoshop. This had to be done for real. So when you're talking about how do you do it all, for me, it was all about you've got to get the right depth of field, you've got to get the thing. And with Storm, he wanted just a flat landscape, and I said, no, this landscape with the water and everything worked really well.
Yeah.
And that's how it came together.
Amazing.
And sort of these pictures sort of live on. I mean, where have you seen your pictures before? I mean, obviously you've seen them on album covers, you've seen them on posters, you've seen them on the sides of buses, etc. Where else have you seen?
Well, books, and I mean, Brooklyn Museum's got that, and various other, so they do get put into sort of, collections and galleries and that sort of stuff. I mean, they're always, I mean, that's the thing, is trying to monitor it. I don't have an agent, so I've never had anybody who sort of really kept an eye on all these things and suddenly said, "Oh, I saw your picture on on the cover of a magazine." I was like, "Oh, great," but I didn't get paid for it, because I haven't got anybody chasing it. So I'm getting a bit better with that now because we've been having a conversation. But it's the for me, it's the fun of doing it, and it's even like when you see pictures that you've done and then they've cropped it right down just to the faces, and I think, well, as long as I've seen it how I wanted to see it and it looks good and it's been received for what it was meant to be, that's great. And when you see them in different things, I mean, the amount of times I've seen pictures of Madonna where they've taken my picture and taken the background out, and you think, "Oh, hang on, that's my portrait of her," sort of thing, So that sort of thing is I've never been that bothered about, but I mean, there's other times when people do use things that are. I remember going to a concert once and sitting down, and I'd taken my kids along, and we were watching this band, and I got the brochure out and I started going through it, and I thought, "Oh, these are all my pictures," and of course they hadn't had the rights to use them, and it ended up they were redoing their deal. It was Wet, and I'd just done the 4 Weddings and a Funeral poster, and so they were then doing the song "Love Is All Around" or something. So they were then re-signing, and it turned out that in order to re-sign, the record company had to pay an extra sum of money to clear what they should have already cleared beforehand, because they weren't meant to use those pictures without permission. So it's that sort of thing. But again, if I'd had an agent, I'd probably got that all sorted.
Yeah.
But it's so I think when you're saying about your pictures, as long as they've come out nicely and I think they've worked, then I'm happy. And as you say, what I like about the Pink Floyd stuff, for instance, is that it does seem to have a sort of lasting value. Even now, people, I did that in the 1980s, so even now people look at it and say, "Oh, it still looks reasonably fresh,"
No, that's interesting, just to pick up on what you were saying, because you were saying earlier about how you've got all these different influences.
Yeah.
And one of your teachers said, "Well, it looks right there, it looks like you're trying to copy them. Where are you?"
Yeah.
And it sounded, when you said it originally, it sounded almost as though you'd come to accept that you can actually stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, that's what science fiction authors write about. Yes, I'm drawing on that person, reference to that and that.
You're drawing on their eye. You're drawing on their look. You're drawing on their thought process, I think, in a way like that. And that's what I find, when you suddenly see something, you think, how does this guy figure this out? And you start looking through their pictures and noticing things. I remember going through my contact sheets, and they say, do you notice that you always go to this sort of distance to the person? You're usually using a wide angle lens. As soon as I use a standard lens, I get lost. I want the wide angle. That's what makes it sort of, for me, always seems to work. And it went to panoramic, so even wider. But it was that process of trying to find your way of looking at things, I think, is good. So yes, just drawing on, I mean, there's still some brilliant photographers here as well, and how they work. And I mean, I'm a big admirer of people like Nick Knight, for instance, whose work has sort of what he's done and what he's done with Show Studio and how he works it. But there are lots of art photographers who I really respect as well. So Richard Mizrak, American photographer, I love his work. Love one of the first things I saw of his was a picture of a cactus at night in the desert, shot with a flash. And I thought, that's what I want to do, So that's how I got involved with his work. So, and that was years ago, and I'm still always keen to see what he's coming up with and what his ideas are.
I think that's where photography is such an interesting space, because you are building a patchwork of all your experiences, and I think photography is just it's a representation of how you see the world, and each person's view is different. And obviously we're all seeing each other's views when we're looking at each other's work. Yeah.
I think that critiques is one of the most important things. And I think when we get down, I mean, with the critiques we used to have at Trent when I was there, would go on for ages, and you'd have people in tears and all sorts of stuff. And you think, whoa, but it was the intensity of it to try and sort of pick up whatever it is that people have got and make it work. And I mean, what I love is sometimes going to critiques and you see some pictures. There was one I did in Norwich once, and we were there, and there were some pictures, and there were some pictures done on the up at Cromer on the beach, and somebody had done pictures of beach huts at night and stuff, and it looked really nice. Somebody else had done the same picture in the daytime, and they didn't even know each other. I said, hold on a second, guys, you're on the same course, have a look at what they're doing, because you've both got the same interest, but in a different aspect and stuff. And it's like if we all went out and took a picture, and say, right, go and take a picture within 50 metres of here or something, we'll all take different pictures, because we'll all be attracted to different sorts of things. And I think that's quite interesting as well.
It is fascinating.
So you just mentioned sort of lighting at night, and we looked at this picture earlier on.
Yeah.
And so I know there's going to be people that are going to leaf through your website and think, how did he do that? It's always the question, what camera did you use? What flash did you use? You mentioned at the beginning with your, what was it, MPP, wasn't it? That's a 5.4 camera.
5.4 camera.
With lots of flashes on.
Yeah.
So how was this one lit? Because
Okay, this one, I mean, I've always, because I started with flash, and so that immediately made things look a bit surreal. So that's whenever I go out, I always have a flash. I don't necessarily use it all the time, but most of the time it's there as a sort of, it's like my studio. How do I want to light this person? There was a shot I did of Morrissey, for instance. Sorry to go away from that. But there's a shot of Morrissey, and he was meant to arrive at lunchtime to do the picture, and we were in the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, and it was all amazing. He didn't turn up. So I was sort of sitting there with blue skies, everything looked great, we're on top of the Griffith Observatory where Johnny... who was it? Rebel Without a Cause, James Dean. So where that was filmed, and he had that sort of slightly James Dean fascination. So I thought, well, we'll do it there. And anyway, eventually turned up in the evening, by which time it had gone completely cloudy and lost it. And then I got my little one flash gun up and set it up, and with a lead. It wasn't remote then; it was just a lead going to it. And then that flashed and lit him. So it was like a really beautiful lighting on him with all the grey background. So that kind for me saved the day, and it took it to a different level, to a different feeling. So with this picture here, this is a girl called Camilla, and it was down in Rye on the south coast, and I'd seen this hut when I was down there, and thought I loved the weirdness of that. And she arrived wearing this shirt with a big heart on it, and I said, well, let's go down to the beach. And so there I'm just using just a flash. So it's probably a flash with I usually put a bit of soft on so it doesn't completely barbecue them, but it's nothing fancy. It's usually just a bit of trace or something like that. So that's just done with that. And when that was actually digital, so I could see what I was doing. But back in the day, you hadn't got a clue. You do a Polaroid and that will give you a rough idea that where your exposure was. But half the time you come back and think, oh God, why didn't I put a bit more light on that? Or okay, going back on that subject, so I'm diverting now. I remember being in the darkroom when I was at college at Trent and doing black and white prints. And because you put your paper in and you have to wait, 2 minutes for it to come through and things, you'd be looking at your picture for so much longer. So you'd be actually watching it. And quite often when you're looking at it and you think, why didn't I just put a reflector there, or why didn't I do this? And you sort of, then you became submerged in your work. And I think that's something I do miss in a way, is not having that sort of, with digital, really like a Gatling gun, you're just taking loads of pictures, and half the time that sort of stopping and studying and looking and thinking, well, where is that work? Does that work or doesn't it work? And I mean, even this morning I was going through some pictures we shot yesterday, and I thought, I knew I should have done that, or I should have done this, and all that stuff. But then you've got to remember that we only need one of that particular setup, that sort of thing. So, but it's I think it's always it always keeps you on your toes, photography.
Yeah. Sure. And that I definitely agree with analog. It does give you that moment to pause.
Yeah.
And like something that it feels like really pushes my patience sometimes, especially when I've, started photography doing digital and then I'm trying out analog. But it's interesting to hear it from the other way around. I think it's but I mean, and in a way, with digital's amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. But there again, I mean, here there's quite a few guys here who are brilliant photographers, and Jack, who runs this place, has a fascination for photography and cameras, and he came in with 10 Olympus pens the other day, all sorts of stuff. But I mean, when I've seen their pictures and they've processed them, just black and white pictures, posted them out, and they're on their phone, they look different on their phone straight away. You've got that quality, you've got that soul, you've got that, and that's what I'm forever looking for. Is that what's that little thing that makes it work? Yeah, that's great.
Talking about that little thing that makes it work, can we talk about Johnny Cash?
Yeah, Johnny Cash.
So I mean, there's a real silver bromide toned quality to these. I don't know if they are shot on digital. I don't know if they are.
No, shot on film, and it was shot with, and then it was a lith print process, where what you do with a lith print is that you put it in an A and B developer. So you put it in for an A and all the greys come up, and then when you've got the right sort of tonal range, you then flip it into the second one and it brings the blacks up. It gives you a sort of quite a rich brown, not sepia, it's richer than that sort of quality. And I started using that in the 90s and things, because I just like the colour and like the contrast. It sort of gave you that oomph of contrast as well. But with Johnny Cash, it was great because it was Rick Rubin, who've Def Jam, who does everybody now. He does Jay-Z, Kanye West.
You say he does them, what do you mean he does them?
He's a producer.
Right,
so
produces it, right.
He produces them. I mean, he's like a guru, basically, and a fascinating character. And I was working with a guy called Martin Atkins, who was the designer on this, and and they got me in to come and do the shoot, and they said, would you go out? And it was in Australia, because he happened to be, Johnny Cash was in Australia with the Carter family, and they were touring. So would you go out there? And I thought, but Johnny Cash is like, I mean, I've been doing lots of young musicians, really, beautiful women like Annie Lennox and all these sort of fantastic faces. So to be suddenly come up with Johnny Cash, who looked like a geography map, his face was so weathered, and he'd had this amazing life of, his songs and his well, you've seen the film, the drunkenness and all the things he went through, and I mean, he was a sort of a wild looking man, and I couldn't quite figure out why I was going out to do it, but this chap Rick Rubin had sat him down and got him playing all this music, and he got like 9 Inch Nails and lots of unusual songs, U2 songs, and got him just playing with the guitar and singing over it, and it was amazing. And it sort of completely was a new generation of, opening him up to a new generation. And my brief was to do something where he looks iconic, They said, we want him to look iconic, we want him man on the road. And so it was man on the road with his guitar case was the initial idea. And we found this dirt track that was outside of Melbourne in a place called Ballarat, which was an old gold mine, and had a railway line that was now washed up and gone. We thought that would be perfect. And we dragged him out there, and he couldn't figure out. He said, I've always been shot on stage or at home. Why am I suddenly going all the way in the back of this van to have this picture taken? And he was quite an elderly gentleman then. And we went out there to do it. And I started shooting him going up and down the railway line with his guitar case. He looked like a preacher man to me. He's in this long black coat, but also it was like a stormy sky and then a field of wheat, so it kind of gave it that slightly religious-y vibe to it, and I thought, oh, this is nice. And when we were doing it, so this is a great example of how the picture grew. So when I started shooting it, it was looking okay, and I thought, no, I haven't got it yet. I haven't captured what I want, what something that works. And there were two dogs that belonged to the station master that were just running around, and Johnny started sort of chatting to them, playing with them. And I got him to stand in front of the field of wheat, and the dogs came up. And because it was filmed, there's two frames where they're both just standing there looking out to the camera. And then the wind got up and they ran off. So it was about that moment and creating that moment. And when it came back, it sort of, that picture then held together. It held as a, I think I was quite pleased with it. I thought it quite well. Anyway, they were very pleased with it as well, which was great. And I ended up doing another 3 albums for him. But that was the first thing. It was called American Recordings as well. That was the first thing that we did. And it was... But again, I remember shooting it on film, and we had to get it developed out in Melbourne. And I thought, I'm going to some lab, are they going to wreck it? What's going to happen? All that sort of thing. But it worked. It was good, and they developed it all, and we sat and printed it all and things like that. It was just great fun.
Amazing. It's so interesting to hear the story behind the images because, as a viewer, not knowing that context, you'd think,
just that one with the dogs, the one next to him where he's throwing his guitar. I said to him, the guitar case, I said, because we did this shoot with the dogs and things, and then he said, oh, thanks guys, I'm off now. So it was like 2 hours, and I thought, I've got a whole campaign to do, I can't do it all. So the next morning we had to sort of entice him out of his hotel to do another shot. So just want to do one shot with your guitar. And he came down in his coat, it was just behind where the railway line was, where Melbourne Station was rather. And he came out and I said, any chance? Because I wanted to get the rebellious side of him. He was such a naughty man, but that's what I wanted, was to show that sort of, when he sang in San Quentin prison, and he's got the prisoners all jeering for him and something. And so I said, would you mind throwing your guitar case? And he said, do you mind if I take the guitar out first? I said, no, help yourself. So he did, and then threw it in the air. And that, to me, that sort of captured the rebelness of him,
Yeah.
So for me, I like the one of the dogs and stuff, and that's probably the more better known one. But the other one captured the spirit of what he was about.
Yeah. And I think that's such a powerful thing to be able to do in a still image is, capture that spirit and emotion.
But that's what photography is about, isn't it?
It is.
It's about those feelings. Yeah.
And when you've got the shot, it's just really exciting.
But even, the trouble is now you can see it all the time.
Yeah.
Whereas there you never really knew. So, even developing the film, you see the negatives, you think, well, I think that one's all right. Then you get it back and think, oops, not sharp, that sort of stuff. But so I think that with photography now, it's such an enjoyable thing to do.
Yeah. And I think with the digital photography world now, you're almost so close to your work because you're seeing it so quickly that, like you said earlier, I think you said 6 months later was like, oh, that is a good photo. I think having that time and space between your work, you end up, seeing it differently. And maybe that's what analog provided in the process because there was already that time there.
Yeah.
But digital is so instant, which obviously is great.
But also, it is instant. But also, I remember going up and up formats, and then shooting with a 10-8 at one point, because it slowed you right down, and you really. The brilliant thing was always upside down, because that's how it worked on those cameras. But it was. But actually, when you look at a picture, if you look at the picture upside down, that's the best way to see if the composition balance works. So things like that, and even now I do that. Not with this, just flip it on the screen now.
Yeah.
So no, it's not, the balance isn't quite right. But when you see it the right way up, there was a lovely one of William Eggleston's one, and it's basically it was a Esso station, and there was something else. There was lines coming in everywhere, and it looked so good. And then when you turn it upside down, it still looks brilliant. So you think that's his eye.
Got the good balance. Amazing.
So that's a lot of chat. I'm mindful that there's always the technical questions. I'm not going to ask you what film you shot there, because that's the one I'm not, but someone's asking it.
Tri-X.
No, you've done it. But D76 as well. Yeah. So, but what we haven't said, and I'm mindful of this, is that, you brought us here today, wandering through the tile yard, middle of London. Everybody you pass, you shake hands and say hello to. Everyone knows you. The first thing you do is a big smile. They smile straight back at you. Everybody wants to chat. So we've talked about the technical stuff, but there's negotiating that relationship with someone you only just meet.
Yeah.
And you talked about bringing your vision, but then earlier on you talked about sort of almost like a pictorial dialogue, they look a bit better if you do it this way, or turn that light off because it's not really about them,
Yeah.
And that's really hard for some people.
I think be yourself is the most important thing. People often put on a bit of a show or come, especially if you're photographing. I mean, I always, whenever I do somebody, it doesn't matter. I mean, like the night before a shoot, I'm always like really, really really on edge and just trying to, just thinking everything through and all that stuff. And even now, and if I go in there feeling too confident, I blow it. So I've got to go in there being nervous. Meeting some of these people, who are very, very well known and very famous people, and sometimes I think, oh Lord, not quite sure, hello, Mick Jagger, or whatever it might be. But it's if they see that you're you, and they see that you know what you want to do, and you're not going to. REM is a good example. I did a lot of work with them for magazine stuff, and they turned around, and when I came in to do it, they said, oh yeah, great, because we'll get into Andy, who knows what we're doing, we'll be in there, be 15 minutes, he's done the shot, and we're over. He said, and there are other people who there want, can I have any chance for backstage pass? I never asked for that. Never. If they say come to the concert, great. But otherwise, that wasn't the thing. So it was very much being as professional as you are. But it was just how I felt comfortable, and then they'd hopefully feel comfortable. So I think if there's that honesty with people, that's the first thing, because people could see if you're messing about or that thing. And then it's the sort of getting onto their wavelength as well. I mean, this is a weird thing to say, but with portraiture, I'm much more interested in how the shapes of the picture balance in the world rather than what their expression is. Half the time, does the picture flow? Does it work? What's on the corner? How does that come together? Once it does, and then I can then sort of make sure they look good. But that's to me, that's the last bit of it. It's just trying to get the feel of how the picture's coming together. And as I say, when I'm working outside, I much prefer it, because you've got, oh, hang on, shall I have a bit of that wall in or not? Or shall, put the sky in or not put the sky in? And it's just sort of, you're forever, looking and composing. But yeah, dealing, I mean, one of the biggest jumps was, I remember when starting out, I just didn't know how to talk to people, and even you sort of say, oh, just go and ask somebody something. Well, if you're a student, you come up, or even I've got to go and ask somebody any chance I can do. Usually I just go and say, any chance I can take a picture, using that backdrop, blah, 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 do you mind? And if people just say, how much? That's the first thing most people say, how much do you give me for it? But usually it's more of a just chatting, and being relaxed with it. And I think one of the biggest things from a student's point of view is getting that confidence. Don't become cocky, but get that sort of self-confidence that actually what you're doing is you feel comfortable with, and people will pick up on that so quickly. The amount of people I see that go and do photographs, say of bands or something, and they've gone in there and you think, well, there's no idea behind this. There's no thought gone into it. That hasn't come across. And so therefore the management, the artist, or whoever it might be, are going to feel that as well. If you go in there saying, okay, I'm going to try this, I'm not sure if it will work, you think, okay, let's see what you got, what's your idea? And I think the more you've got to make them look good. That's number one. But now, the secondary is just trying to just sort of bring them into your what you want to do and things. And I mean, quite often, sometimes you say you've got to listen to the music. You think, oh, do I have to? Because some of it's not quite my cup of tea. But at the same time, it's that energy that's there, or it's something, or it's a line of a lyric, or something like that. And you think that's my thread, that's what I'll go with, is what somebody said, or even in a conversation they say something, I get where you're doing, how are you feeling? Does that make sense?
It does, and it's really generous of you as well, because I empathise with that sort of feeling nervous and going in overconfident and blowing it.
Yeah.
Got that. I've worked out that I do that. I'm sure a lot of people will.
Yeah.
But I'm sure a lot of young people think that their anxiety and their nervousness about this around the shoot, not knowing what to do, means they're less of something or something. Yeah, they're missing something, and it's imposter syndrome writ large sort of thing.
Don't it's just you've got to be a bit more confident in a way, and you can only get that from sort of being practicing and things like that. But it's the honesty thing, I think, is the biggest thing, because so many times you see people putting on a bit of a show and you think, oh God, and there's always one on the shoot. There'll be a stylist or a PR person or thing like that, and you think, okay, see you in a minute, let's get on with it. But there's just a sort of
So your advice, say, for students, if they're doing, say they've got their first job on a shoot, say they're feeling nervous, is it better for them just to turn up and be like, yeah, I am nervous, but I'm here, I'm going to try my best?
I wouldn't go in and say I'm nervous, because then that makes them nervous. Yeah. So you've got to remember, you've got to settle whoever you're working with, or make them feel a bit confident. And if they go in and say, oh, I really like that, if it was a musician or something, oh, I saw you at such and such a concert, they think, oh, so okay, you've done a bit of research, so I understand it. And then I really like that song, and they might say, what do you like about it? And you say, well, it just felt so sort of open and soothing, or something like that, whatever you might want to say about the song. And then they think, okay, so this person is interested in what I do, so therefore I'd be interested in working with them. Now, I'm using a musician as an example. I think you can use it in anything. You go into sort of businesses, and sometimes if I've got to do sort of businessy profile things, that's always a bit awkward, because I'm never quite sure what to do. And I had to do a whole load of portraits for Apple once, and they had to come in and with what their inspiration was or something, and we were photographed, and somebody came with a tennis racket, and I thought, what am I doing with this? and also they all came in like casually dressed, and then they wanted a formal picture, and they all came in suits. But the whole thing about Apple was it was the relaxedness, and the Steve Jobs, just a black T-shirt and things like that. But they're all looking for their next job, so they want to look like they're a businessman. So it was quite funny just seeing the sort of the culture that goes on in these things. But it's but what I loved is you're just meeting, whenever you meet somebody, everybody's got a bit of a story, or they're interesting, or where they live, or you speak to somebody like, oh yeah, I live in a croft in Scotland. You think, really? And they seem like a sort of whiz kid in London, and that's fascinating.
So yeah, definitely photography is a lot about the people and the photos.
Photography is also a passport to going to the most amazing places.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been in, on icebergs and volcanoes, photographed King, and all that nonsense. But it's you're being being with these sorts of people. When I did him, it was a nuisance, because I turned up. We was at Dumfries House up in Scotland, and we had a personal shoot to do there. My wife said, "I'm coming. I'm not going to miss out on this one," so she came as well. And when we got there, we had to set up all the lights in the room that was selected that they wanted to shoot in. And I was setting it up early in the morning, and this valet came down and said, "Sorry, could you keep the noise down? He's asleep upstairs." And I was sticking lights up and things like that, so we had to keep it down. And then when he came down, he was really lovely, and he says hello to everybody. And I had a sort of a 20-minute slot. 10 minutes, he was still shaking hands. I said, come on. And he was really nice and very, very easy. And it was, again, I didn't think, it's who he was. It was about sort of, how can I make this picture work? And I wanted all the grandiose of the room to come across, and so there was big portraits of his ancestors on the wall, and the room was pink. It looked like a Barbara Cartland thing. So the whole thing was kind of quite, again, surreal in a way. At the same time, I wanted to make him look like it worked, but they'd laid all the tables out, so it looked a bit weird in this dining room. But so you've got to think, how can I balance all this and play with it at the time? And you've only got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
That's the other, I mean, like the classic 5 minutes one is the Prince shoot I did, which was out, he hadn't been photographed in Europe for about 10 years, and he had won some World Music Award out in Monte Carlo. So I got sent out with a journalist, and he and I were going to go and do a feature on Prince, and we turned up there on the Sunday, meant to be shooting on the Monday. That didn't happen. Then the next day it didn't happen. Then the next day it didn't happen. And his people will always say, he wasn't Prince then. He was then the man formerly known as Prince. So he just had this sort of squiggle thing. So I remember saying to one of his bodyguards, who was big built guy with muscles everywhere, and I said, so what do you call him? So I call him Sir. And I said, well, I'm not calling him Sir. And anyway, when he eventually he did a concert up in an upstairs room in Monte Carlo, and the Monte Carlo Jet Set were there, and we were invited, but we couldn't bring cameras, so just to come and see what he was up to. 2:00 in the morning it started, and he played from 2:00 to 4:00, not a bead of sweat. And at the end they came up and said, he's ready for a picture. I said, you might be, I'm not, we'll do it tomorrow. So we ended up doing it on the roof of his hotel in I think it was the Hotel de Paris in Monte Carlo or something. We were on the roof of there, got it all set up, everything ready. I didn't have an assistant, it was just myself and the journalist Adrian Devoy, and we were there ready. And eventually he came late. He was meant to be on some big launch thing at 6:00, and they said it's being wired worldwide and blah blah blah. He turns up at 6:05. I thought this isn't going to happen, and he walked on in, and I sort of said something like, oh, you really, no, because what he wore was amazing. How he is amazing. I loved his complete eccentricity, but his passion for it was second to none, and his ability, as I say, to play. Anyway, he turned up with this looking absolutely magnificent, really, with big blue collars and a cane with a big gold orb on it and all that sort of stuff. And I went in and we started to take the pictures, and as he walked in, the wind blew and my flash fell on the floor, and I thought, I've just got to wing it. I can't stop now and start again. So, and he sort of crunched across on his high heels, across all the broken glass, went there, stood there ready to do the picture, and we started taking the photograph. And as we were doing that, the sun just came out and I got a glint in his eye. And I said to him, oh, you're already taking the piss, aren't you? And he said, and you just got your picture, didn't you? I went, absolutely. Wow. 3-minute photo session. 1 week I was there for, it's 3 minutes. Wow. And we did a quick shot of his band as well, upsets, and that was it. So I came back with one roll of film, of 120 film, so there's 12 pictures on the film, and got 8 pages out of it. So, I mean, he gave it. When he was there, he was sort of, wow, wow. And then when I said, he said, you just got your picture, and that was the picture I got, which then, because he sort of went, he then gave an expression in a way.
Yeah, amazing.
So that was, and that game was thrilling, because you got a film and you think, so I came all the way back to, do I put this through the X-ray machine or not? Is this going to work? But that's what I've always loved about photography. It's that kind of, there's a super tension, and especially when I couldn't mess about. I just had to go for it, and it was it worked, which was good.
So you said you don't have an agent.
No.
I'm just curious of how you get these, like how these opportunities came to you. Like, were you contacted directly off of other work you'd done?
The first one I did was the Bow Wow Wow with Malcolm McLaren and Vivian, and that. Then I got a call from EMI, and there was a guy called Rob Waugh who was a product manager there, and he said, I've got a bunch of lads from Birmingham, see what you can make of them. And it was Duran Duran, and that was my second job. So I went off and did their first ever shoots. So we did their stuff out, and they came to I had a studio in Nottingham on Carrington Street, so they came up, which is just by the train station. And it was just a little attic room, and they came up there and we did a whole shoot there. Then I took them down to Milton Keynes, because I was really interested in it was just opening then, Milton Keynes, and there was a big glass box which looked really ominous, and I thought it looked really futuristic. And also because their music was kind of electronic-y and stuff, it worked well with the flash and blur. So when I did the Rio album cover, I had them up on the top of a building, looking out with all the nights, all the night lights, and I shot them with a flash. So same thing, shot them with a flash. They then had to stand still for 30 seconds. Or as I was reminded by one of them the other day when I saw him, I said, 30 chimpanzees, 1 chimpanzee, 2 chimpanzees, because it was 30 seconds. They had to stay to expose it all. Yeah. They'd gone against the sky, so they were all black, but they didn't want to move. And then at the end of that exposure, I kicked the tripod, and it went like that, which gave it a bzzz, which I thought looked like, that sounded like their music. So again, that worked as well. You were just playing with ideas.
Was that an intentional kick? Or
Intentional kick, yeah. Because of the flash and blur, and I was doing it, and I thought, well, I ended up having to change it's now technical, so I shot it and kept the obviously the exposure down, and it was focused on them, so they were probably like 2 meters from me, but all the lights in the distance were out of focus because it was a narrow depth of field. So I then turned the focus to infinity, so then it would expose all the lights in so that they were sharp as well, and then, as I say, kick the tripod just to give it a bit of an energy, and it worked, which was quite good. Sometimes you do it and you come back and it didn't work, but it's that one, it did work for them. So how my work came about was then that would come out, and it would say the pictures would end up in magazines, and then somebody else would pick up and say, well, any chance you could do a shoot for us. So I ended up doing a lot of the in fact, again, how I got started, when I did the Bow Wow Wow one, they then did a video, and I was doing the stills on the video, and the guy, a chap called Eric Fellner, was the producer, who then went on to do all the 4 Weddings and a Funeral. He's a big American producer, they're called Working Title now, and they did loads of stuff, and we had a little studio in London by then, and they were operating out of the studio, so it was just everybody you kind of met at the time. We got together and did things, and so I was doing the stills, they were doing the videos and stuff, and I mean, I learned so much about lighting from hanging around on video shoots and seeing how that happened, because again, and when we're at Trent, as you know, it's that technical side. Unless you're doing something, you don't really do much of it. And we're going and saying, oh, so that's how they get that effect, and that's how so that was always really good fun. And we ended up being Sri Lanka doing shoots and stuff. So, in fact, in Hungry Like the Wolf, one of Duran Duran's singles, there's about 40 seconds in, there are 2 nuns in a cafe in the middle of in Colombo in Sri Lanka, and Simon Le Bon comes and sort of turns the table upside down. Well, one of the nuns had food poisoning. He said, what can we do? I said, I'll be the nun. So I'm the other nun. So that's one of my claims to fame.
That's a great story.
That's a great claim to fame.
Yeah.
You need to dedicate that story to Claire Lockwood, whose parting sort of request was, can you get him to talk about Duran Duran?
Right, yeah.
I think she's after a ticket or something.
No, definitely.
Perhaps a birthday invitation, I don't know. I'd love to know who you think, the sort of people listening to this, our students and others, who you think they should look at? Who have they perhaps forgotten? I mean, we mentioned a book that most photographers won't have heard of, by Michael M. Persig.
Right.
But what other photographers do you think? You mentioned Brian Griffin.
Yeah.
For
I mean, I think in a way what I loved about when I was at Trent, we had a big library there, and we were always being sent in to go and search. So somebody would look at your work and say, you should have a look at Lee Freelander, or you should have a look at, if it was whoever it may be. So there'd be lots of names being floated around. And if you see, I mean, I often see, when I see students' work and we're going through it, I say, do you know so-and-so? And they might know lots of contemporary photographers, but you go back and say, no, have a look at, Julia Margaret Cameron, for instance, or have a look at somebody sort of quite historical, Cartier-Bresson. Cartier-Bresson's pictures are amazing, decisive moment and stuff. But you just think, oh yeah, that's old stuff. But actually, when you start to look at them, they're beautifully composed, beautifully. He was about the decisive moment was his thing. So there's a lovely picture of a man jumping over a puddle, and he hasn't quite hit the puddle, and it's that anticipation that I love in photography as well. So it's those sorts of things. But I think in a way it becomes from what you're doing, how you actually take pictures. People then see a little, old geezers like me will see something in it and say, you should have a look at this guy's work, or have a look at her work, And it's often that sort of thing will lead to other ideas. And I mean, I'm forever, it's not just, I love modern architecture, and that inspires me, and design inspires me, and also, so it's not just photography and paintings. I'm going to the Rothko paint show out in Paris just to go and have a look. That's all. I'm not going for any other reason, because I've seen his paintings, but there's a bigger collection out there at the moment. So I think, I just want to just get the feel of what it is like looking at his paintings, that sort of stuff. And I'll probably end up just doing stripes next, like his paintings, whatever. But it's the joy of seeing, really.
That's beautiful.
That is great. Just that constant feeding. You get your hunger and enthusiasm again. Just constantly feeding that for that.
Yeah.
We're asking questions like, how do you come up with your ideas? What it's, and you're telling us now. The next thing is you're going to go and look at Rothko.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, as you say, there's quite a few, like the Prince story. Or there's quite a few stories of things where how the work came about, or how it changed and things. And I think that's what's often quite interesting, is it always be ready for the unexpected. One more story. Okay, ABC. We went out with Mark Farrow, who I really like his work. He's a designer at ABC with the band, and we went out to Brasilia because the album's called Skyscraping. And we said, well, rather than doing the obvious and doing skyscrapers, we do this amazing. Brasilia is a guy called Oscar Niemeyer, who was an architect, and he built the whole city, and it's the most modernist, beautiful shaped buildings and stuff. Very interesting stuff. Anyway, we ended up shooting there, and I had the panoramic camera with me to do, because I wanted to get, big wide visions, and when we got there, we arrived, and I opened all the film up for I was using I think it was a Bronica or a Mamiya or something, a medium format camera, and got all the film out, and it was all 220 size film, which is double the length, which works in the panoramic camera but doesn't work in any other camera. So I had to shoot the whole thing on this panoramic, bar 2 rolls of which I had of the other stuff, and it was only because I hadn't checked before we went out what the film was. It was the same film, the same packaging, but instead of it was double the size rather than the thing. So all it says is 220 rather than 120 at the bottom of the tin, and I hadn't noticed that. So I had to shoot the whole thing with the panoramic. And they kept saying, "Why are you doing it like that?" I said, "It's working so well." I also knew that I could crop in because it was like a normal thing. And so, but actually, because of that, it then changed the whole style of the shoot, because then I thought you were sort of looking at staircases, or you were looking at, these amazing curves of buildings and stuff, and you think, well, let's just do it like that, with a curve and a car at the end, and just playing around with it. So it ended up being a huge success, but I haven't told Martin Fry of ABC that's what happened.
Your secret's safe with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been such a great conversation.
Good.
Thank you so much for having us here.
I'm delighted.
Really enjoyable.
Delighted.
Yes, thanks, Ellie.
My pleasure.